the Bishop of Table Bay and Bishop Joshua Lowe, and we wish him well in the endeavors as we anticipate the Lenten program that is a few weeks away. But primarily the words of Archbishop Thabo, which I will now read to you, and he says, "Comrades, colleagues, and fellow defenders of democracy." He notes that he wanted to start with the words, "Amanda wetu," power is ours. But he says, nowadays we have delegated our power, the people's power, to a few, most of whom appear self-serving. Thank you for the privilege of asking me to share some thoughts with you today. It is important that we have rallied together in this, the People's Cathedral, to examine the real state of the nation. A nation in which we have won political but not economic liberation. A nation in which we are still haunted by the scandalous gap between the rich and the poor. In these days when too many of our leaders are tempted by the lure of quick wealth, have become sellouts to the struggle against apartheid. It is important that we step up our activism to stop the slide downwards into becoming a failed state. And so he says, my message is simple. To save South Africa today, we need to embark on a new struggle to replace the old struggle against apartheid. A new struggle for a new generation. A struggle to regain our moral compass. A struggle to end economic inequality. A struggle to bring about equality of opportunity and realize the promise of our Constitution. Then he lists the following 3 points. Firstly, we must recognize that the fight against corruption will be as tough as that against apartheid. It will take the same level of courage as our mothers and our fathers displayed in the old struggle. For it is becoming clear that the criminals responsible for the plague of corruption, which threatens to engulf us, will fight hard to stay out of orange jumpsuits, deploying even death squads to silence us, just as the criminals who enforced apartheid did. And then he refers to the place of whistleblowers in this culture of defiance. He says that amandanga wetu in this real SONA, we must commit to securing much better protection for those who blow the whistle on corruption. We say to President Ramaphosa, Mr. President, in your State of the Nation address, you must spell out practical action to achieve protection for whistleblowers, and we demand that your commitment be acted upon immediately. Secondly, at the bedrock of our democracy is the promise that those in public life will pursue the common good so that everyone can flourish. The Archbishop notes that this has not happened. Load shedding or rolling back has revealed South Africa's gross inequalities once again. Those with means have inverters, batteries and solar power and can dine out. But those without have no lights. Their food rot in the fridges. Thieves steal their electricity. Many are jobless, and worst of all, their children can't study most nights. And so I believe it is our sacred duty in this real SONA to ensure that we call as loudly as we can for an end to the blackouts, or at least to have spelled out a clear, practical timetable detailing the steps which will be taken to end them. And then lastly, a challenge to ourselves at this real SONA, and that is this. We need to create a multi-stakeholder forum to pursue the new struggle. And as I have said before, an uncoordinated constellation of independent movements is not enough. We need a coalition that embraces all voices, from the poor to the spiritual leaders of our country, to the leaders of business and labor. We need an alliance of leaders and forces to say enough is enough. That alliance must include the youth, and one of its primary objectives in securing the future should be registering young people to register to vote. And then they must be motivated to vote and help change government policies. It is time to heal our political polarizations and to recognize that the chasms between rich and poor cannot be tolerated any longer. The new struggle cannot be for a new multi-racial middle class to replace the white elite of the apartheid era. No, our struggle must be for a new society, a more equal society, a society of equal opportunity to which the wealth that comes from new economic growth is shared equitably amongst all. And our country's future, the future of our children, our grandchildren, and the generations to come depend on it. And then lastly, in the international arena of solidarity, in the spirit of internationalism, the Archbishop says, on the international front, please let us commit and advocate for peace and demand clearer policy in our international relationships. And so that brings to an end the message from the Archbishop. And may I remind you that in this February, the so-called declared month of love that is all there in Valentine's Day in a few days' time, we are reminded about the essence of love. And the words of Cornel West is, he says that tenderness is what love looks like in private. But then he refers us to the fact that love has got a public face. And the public aspect of love is that of justice. And while we are committed to all the essentials of love, both personal, but the most damning demand on us is to be lovers of justice and to work for it and to make sure that it's established in our own South Africa in our lifetime. Thank you.
The Archbishop, when I sat here Christmas Eve for midnight mass, made this call for the coming together of all of the formations in this country who have an interest in saving our democracy. Now, 40 years ago, just over about a week now, at a conference in Johannesburg, Reverend Alan Busak made the call for the formation of the United Democratic Front. That was towards the end of January 40 years ago. By August of that year, the United Democratic Front was formed. This place was home to many of its rallies, gave refuge to many of the activists, and the arch is interred here. So those of you who want to pay your homage and respects later, you can do that. But I suppose what might be more important is to go back to what was started 40 years ago, pick up what is relevant today, and urge those in need to come together to cross whatever barriers and boundaries of difference they have, to find that minimum common agenda that will help move this country out of the crisis that we are in and which is not going to get easier tomorrow. So, to perhaps contextualize all of this and further introduce, I think, the context for today's gathering. Reverend Edwin Harrison, speaking here from the South African Churches Leaders Initiative. I'm not going to read the long CV here, but welcome. Rev? You can applaud.
Good evening, everyone. May I ask that we all stand and just have a moment of silence for the people of Turkey and Syria. We pray for those who have died, for their families, and for all those who are working to continue to assist. Rest eternal grant unto them, O Lord, and may your light perpetual shine upon them. Amen. Please be seated. Thank you, Defend Our Democracy. Thank you, Nishan Bolton, and the organizing committee for inviting me to say a few words as we start this evening. It is my privilege to share some initial thoughts with you about the State of the Nation address that will happen tomorrow night. Thank you, Father. I do that knowing that those who will speak tonight, people who have all made and continue to make remarkable contributions to our life together, will not only challenge us, but will fill us with hope and courage. We also do what we do tonight to remind us that 40 years ago, we launched the United Democratic Front, and we then said with some holy impatience, we want all of our rights, we want them here, and we want them now. This has unfortunately still not happened. And we come together tonight to recommit ourselves to that goal. Those of us who were in the anti-apartheid movement and in the struggle, who were bitten by police dogs and jailed because we knew that apartheid was fundamentally wrong, also know that what we're experiencing in South Africa today is also fundamentally wrong. Why are our whistleblowers not protected? This is not rocket science. Why are politicians killing each other in order to feed at the trough? We all know that this is wrong and should be stopped. Why is there this big inequality gap? Why are 70% of our young people unemployed? Why do people from the rest of the continent feel unsafe in our country? Why do women and the LGBTQI community feel unsafe in our country? Friends, we must now say to each other, as much as we desire that politicians change, the biggest change must come from us, those of us who are gathered here and those who are listening online. We must give these politicians no space to do what they have done up till now. We, the people, have the power, and if we move forward in hope, things will change. But let's be clear, our hope is not dependent on them. Let's be clear, we will not allow hope to die. And we are not talking about optimism that tomorrow becomes pessimism and cynicism. Hope, as we speak about it, and as we know it, and as we experience it, is permanent, and it is deep within us. So I wrote something recently, and I'm going to read some of it. And I hope that it will inspire us as we move forward tonight. And I raised two questions. Are we a despairing country, or are we a hopeful country? Are we merchants of hope or gangsters of despair? Listen to this. Hope gives us energy. Despair drains us of energy and creativity. Hope gives us a vision. Despair gives us a tunnel. Hope gives new life. Despair brings death. Hope creates space. Despair closes up the space. Hope is grace. Despair is hatred. Hope offers clarity. Despair creates chaos. Hope heals. Despair hurts. Hope relates. Despair colonizes. Hope waters. Despair bleeds. Hope transcends. Despair descends. Hope transfigures. Despair disfigures. Hope gives and forgives. Despair nurses anger. Hope values the past, but despair weaponizes the past. Hope is about being present in the present, being a gift. Despair dwells on and relishes the hurts of the past. Hope shapes the future. Despair crushes the future. Hope births joy. Despair breeds sadness. Hope leads to goodness. Despair leads to evil. Hope is a gift. Despair leads us adrift. Hope comforts. Despair distresses. And so, friends, comrades, compatriots, hold on to hope. Let their despair not have the last word. And so let these three mountains behind us remind us of faith and hope and love. And let love be what holds us together. May God bless us all. Thank you.
Thanks, Rev. You know the country is in a crisis. When a mayor of probably what was once the wealthiest metro in the country says that the inner city of Johannesburg is the capital of Johannesburg. But what is even more worrying is that that metro now has an MMC for transport who at one point thought it was the best thing to have women on tables with sushi on their bodies and served 6 years for Ponzi schemes. Then you know that you're in crisis. When that's the best that is being put forward to provide the kinds of guidance to our metropolitan cities. But I suppose that this goes for municipalities across the country. The next part of the program, Zakira was saying, you know, who's the DOD convener or director, she said the program must get big names. There's no big names, the hall is not going to be full. And I said to Zakira, who are these big names? There's no such thing as big names anymore. The generation of the UDF were the ages of the young people who are now going to come up onto stage when they came forward to provide the leadership that the country needed. And in time, they became big names. So I want you to give a warm welcome to the future big names of our democracy in South Africa. Tessa Dooms, Aktolile Notwala, racial feature from Outa, and the facilitator of that, real driver behind Defend Our Democracy, Zakira Vadi. Zakira will facilitate this conversation.
Thanks, everyone, and thank you for coming through. Welcome to our panelists, and we'll get right into it. So, Atlolile, maybe you can start off and tell us, why are we in a crisis? The president yesterday wrote an op-ed and says that we are in a crisis. Maybe you can share the why.
Oh, I didn't expect that would start with me. Thank you, and I think it's afternoon. Good afternoon to everyone. We're in a crisis because we lack leaders in the country. There are people that are in leadership positions, but we don't have leaders in the country. We don't have people-centered leaders. We have people that are accountable to different political parties, but not to the general public or the general citizen of South Africa. And one of the biggest crises that I think was mentioned here in the country is the levels of inequalities that we see every day in all sectors of society. Whether we're talking about the workspace, the levels of inequality there, whether we're talking about education, whether we're talking about places of worship even, whether we're talking about the civil society sector, which many of us are part of, the levels of inequality that exist in all these spaces and sectors of society are part of a deeper and growing crisis in South Africa.
Thanks, and I think you've spoken to some of the issues, but maybe Tessa, from your side, if you could frame for us, what does this crisis really mean? I know you've previously given the analogy of a car driving very quickly towards a cliff, so maybe if you can perhaps expand on that analogy.
Exactly. Before I get there, I wanted to start my inputs in terms of explaining the crisis using a few analogies and anecdotes more than analogies, to be honest. So this morning, I was part of a protest in the CBD of Cape Town, led by Akolile, Whistleblower, and a number of civic movements across the city that deal with housing and land issues. And a moment struck me. We were walking past a mural of Nelson Mandela and Steve Biko looking down on the very street that we were marching on for land and housing, for basic services. And in front of me was marching a 3-year-old girl. And I realized the depth of our crisis is that right now we are staring down the barrel of that 3-year-old girl having to become a 30-year-old woman still marching down that street for land, housing, and basic services. While Mandela and Biko were doing the same thing. We are in the same place for the majority of people now in terms of a lived experience and reality as we were before we had our freedom, which means so few of us are actually free. And the chances are the next generation are not going to be freer than we are. It then reminded me of about a year ago, being in Newlands East. Our organization does a program called Democracy Builder, and we were about to get into a community hall to run a session on democracy, when we realized that there was a group of learners from the high school across the road who were in a protest as we were there. And I said to my team, there's no way we're going to have a cute conversation about democracy in this hall while there are people, young people protesting outside. And when we got outside, we found out they're protesting because the day before that, a learner died from a stab wound from another learner, and that was the 15th learner from that school that year, last year, who had died, and that was only in April. And it leads me to my last story, which is very personal. That one of my cousins in his 20s committed suicide last year, in August, because he was struggling to grapple with the fact that he couldn't find a job so that he could care for his child. Our democracy is killing us. Our democracy is killing people's futures. It is literally causing people to take their lives to live in this democracy. And that's the state. So when I say that democracy and the depth of our crisis is about disillusionment and despair, I'm not just talking about disillusionment with the ruling party and with the ANC and people not showing up to vote. I'm talking about people opting out of living because it's hard to be in this democracy. And that's what we must all have in our minds when we think about what we are fighting for here. We're not fighting to replace one ruling class with another. We are literally fighting for our comrades and our compatriots and our fellow people in this country and our families' lives. Because the single biggest word that I heard going across this country last year that came out of people's mouths when they talked about this democracy was living in a state of trauma. People would be speaking in fluent isiXhosa and all of a sudden say the word trauma in English because they couldn't find the Xhosa word, which I hope doesn't exist. Ngoa. But trauma is the state we are in. And our political leaders and the leaders of this country can barely utter the word crisis, never mind trauma, and therefore we are leaderless, as Access said.
Thanks for that, Tessa. And I think that your analogies are reflected in the experiences of so many, from children who drown in pit latrines to young people who are shot in informal settlements because there's just shooting incidences that no one can explain. Rachel, coming to you, AUTA has done a lot of work across different SOEs, looking at different issues. What do you think is the common trend? Why are we in this crisis? And particularly looking at it in the angle, from the angle of SOEs and state institutions.
Thank you for that, Sakira. Perhaps if I can start saying we are here, first of all, due to the calling for us as public to be here, grassroots organizations, civil society organizations, interested individuals, because we wish to serve this country and the people. I don't know how many of you have tried to attend or to be on the guest list of SONA so that we could add voices to the event, but it was closed off for civil society organizations, not on purpose, but because we missed deadlines. We're not part of the political elite to be there, whereas I think for myself, in a perfect ideal world, that there would have been concerted effort to make sure that there is representation of civil society organizations and grassroots organizations, since we are on the ground and getting our hands dirty. If we are looking at the state of the nation tomorrow, I would clearly say that our state or our nation is in a state. Tessa clearly said about trauma, and I agree. For me, this feels like a bipolar society that has got symptoms of post-traumatic stress, and it's an ill society. And this is something that we see seeping through on so many levels. If I can think of a story, there was a lady, and she was ill. She went to the doctor, and she said, "Doctor, everywhere I touch, it hurts, it is sore. And the doctor, he examined her and he looked at her feet, her knees, her stomach, her lungs, her head. And upon examination, he said to her, your finger is broken. There's nothing wrong with your body, but your finger is broken. And that is a finger that is not attuned to the body. And what we are seeing in this instance is a complete disconnect across different levels of government that should be looking after the needs of the citizens, because essentially we pay them. The Organization on Doing Tax Abuse focuses on how our funds are being spent, our taxes. So we are essentially paying the salaries of people that ought to serve us and our interests, but those aren't being carried. I quickly want to refer, though, to the philosopher Plato, and he likened a state to the body. So the body would be the workers, the citizens, working hard, getting through every day, struggling for our survival. The heart would be the military, those protecting the citizens and making sure it functions, that there are boundaries, that it's safe. And the mind would be the politicians that think rationally as to how it is best to rule the state or the country. Currently, we have a heart that is absent, that doesn't care, that doesn't function with love and care for the society. We have a mind that is irrational and completely disconnected. So coming back to your question, in terms of the state that our nation is in, we are seeing crumbling of infrastructure on so many levels. These aren't events taking place in silos or in isolation. It's not just a little bit of a water problem or a little bit of an electricity problem or a little bit of that problem. These are all interconnected and caused by those that are out of touch and did not consider taking care of the society that pays them to do so. And that is a fundamental concern. We have to consider also a new form of BBEEE, which is bring back education, employment, and electricity. And those are the things that we are fighting for in these events, and hoping that tomorrow we don't hear promises again. We need to see action.
Thanks for that, Rachel. And I think it goes to, there's a saying attributed to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, that if one part of the body hurts, it's as if the whole body hurts, and comparing that to society itself. And I think we are in that state, as you reflected. Atolile, from your side, you mentioned that we are in a state of crisis because we lack leaders. And I want you to focus a little bit on this. Why do you think we lack this leadership? Do you center this to political leadership? Does it include societal leadership? And linked to that, if you can tell us, what would good leadership look like at a point of crisis?
I don't think we lack leaders in the country. I think we lack leaders who are not in the position of power that we need. We have politicians in those positions of power. We also have criminals who you can give the same title. You can be a politician and the title and the criminal at the same time, who are in those positions of power, whose priority is thinking about now and every 5 years. 2023 is going to be a very busy year politically, because all those politicians and all those criminals are thinking about their pockets, are thinking about positions, occupying positions of power so that they can continue to line up their pockets. We have leaders in many different sectors of society. Some of those are here in the room. Tessa mentioned young leaders from Equal Education, young leaders from Difuna Ugwazi, young leaders from many different organizations and movements that were at the march today. And I just want to touch on this issue of trauma that Tessa mentioned. I woke up to news and talking about young people of a team member, a soccer team member. I have a team in Kailicha called Role Models FC. We woke up to the news that he was shot dead in his house. This speaks to the crisis of the dignity and the quality of life of primarily black working class people in the country. That for a lot of time is never necessarily seen as a crisis. At the same time, what speaks to that is the fact that the march that Tessa was talking about was centered around Bulelani Kolani, who in 2020 was dragged out of his home naked in the public by law enforcement officers in Cape Town. Both these stories are very personal and triggering, traumatic. I was there when Bulelani was being dragged by law enforcement. There was very little that we could do because guns were pointing at us. I saw Uonge Makangana, who was shot dead last night, just this weekend after we had played a soccer game. This is the crisis, this is the real crisis that we should continue talking about. And a few days ago, in I think, discussion around an activist lawyer comrade from Swaziland who was assassinated. I was speaking with comrades there from Abahlali Basemjondolo, who were outlining the pain that they have to live under in terms of political assassinations in KZN. Abahlali have lost 24 members since inception in 2005. And how do we not see that as a crisis, as a nation? The moment that happens to Abahlali and it happens and we just let it go, it's just going to continue happening. And so a life of a young black man, a life of a person living in informal settlements, 1 life, 2 lives, 3 lives that are lost, we should start seeing these issues as crisis. That's the crisis. These are the crises that need us to form a united front as South Africans.
Thanks for that wonderful input, and it does go to, I think, perhaps in a minute or two we'll focus on the forms of solidarity that we should be fostering. But before we come to that, Tessa, Rivonia Circles has centered a lot of focus on politics, the primacy of politics. If you could perhaps share your views on this and perhaps articulate what's the view of Rivonia Circle on this as well.
Sure, you're going to get your car analogy now, Zakira. So when we started Rivonia Circle about a year ago, we were very intentional to say, yes, we're in the NGO and civil society space, but we are here to influence and change the politics of the country. Because we have a political crisis. We have a political problem that we have glossed over and left to be somebody else's problem for too long. So as a country, we've become fixated on the question of the economy. And rightfully so, because people need to be fed. But there's another part of becoming a less unequal society, a more equal society, and a society where people are not in poverty, particularly those two things. And that's the role of the state. If you have a broken state, you have no prospects of people getting into a vibrant economy. There's just zero prospect for that thing. I can tell you today. I've currently been in the throes of trying to get a young man who's about 30 years old a place to stay. For the last year, he's been transient in terms of a place to stay. And he keeps saying to me, how do I get a job if I don't have a place to stay? Never mind an address that I need to write down. How do I find a job when I don't have a place to stay? How do I get dressed? How do I present myself to the world without a place to stay? And we can ask the same about water, we can ask the same about sanitation, we can ask the same about roads, we can ask the same about Wi-Fi, we can ask the same about everything. Things that the state should be providing to give everybody a decent shot at living a good life. And we can alter the economy in all sorts of flips and shapes and sizes. But with a broken state, most people won't be able to participate in that economy. And so we'll still create economy for the few because we've decided that the political problem isn't our problem. Because apparently politics is only for a select few in the country. We come from a history where politics became everybody in this country's problem. And then in 1994, it's like a gift. We handed over all of our political agency to the state and anybody who dared contest its power. And then we said, we are not the ones. And so the analogy that Zakira is talking about is based on my call and the call that at Rivonia Circle that we've started to say, is that advocacy and resistance is simply not enough. We're not going to resist the state and resist the politicians enough to get out of the crisis that we're in. If South Africa as a country is a car driving towards a cliff, and we're about to fall off the cliff, the majority of us have decided the problem is there's a bad driver, and we're going to stand outside and we're going to shout, "War, driver, war." Yeah, driver, 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 driver. We're going to put rocks, we're going to roll around, we're going to put fireworks, and when it gets to the edge of the cliff, we're going to go, well, now the driver's going to learn how bad a driver they are. The problem is, it's not the driver's car, it's our car. It's not their country, it's ours. So when the car goes down, it's our car that goes down, and we don't have a car. They may lose their lives in the process, but we don't have a car. We can no longer leave politics to politicians. Politics must be everybody's business. Politics must be daily, not every 5 years for 5 minutes. Politics is the core problem that we have. If we fix politics, if we fix governance, if we make our democracy real, and we co-govern this thing, then we get to go somewhere. And that's why at the Rivonia Circle we make no bones about it. We believe that part of solving the issue is making sure that everybody who's part of Project South Africa takes back power to change this thing, and we're no longer leaving up to some messianic figure, the new Mandela. The Mandela's not coming, by the way. What was said earlier about us being the next, I'm not waiting for the next Mandela. I'm trying to say, how do we give everybody in this society some power to change things?
Thanks, Tessa. And I think it goes to two aspects. One is involvement in formal electoral politics. And there's new discussion in civil society organizations about entering the sphere. But there's also work, as much as that work may not be involved in formal politics, but is decidedly political, that people can do outside of formal politics as well. And I think that the organizations here represent a bit of both. Rachel, OUTA has been doing phenomenal accountability work, be it ESCOM, be it Denel, being delinquent directors. Can you tell us what does accountability work look like? And you can reflect on some of the work of OUTA. But for all of us sitting here, how do we hold our elected representatives at all levels accountable?
Thank you so much for that, Zakira. So accountability, of course, is to hold somebody to account. For every action, there's a reaction. If you act somehow, there will be consequences. One of the constant key findings year on year from the Auditor General of South Africa is that there is a lack in consequence management across the board. Whether it is at state-owned entities, whether it's in national government departments or municipalities. Somebody does something wrong, nothing happens. We see this also reflected in the Zondo recommendations and the Commission of Inquiry, where it was clearly stated that there were names of people implicated with evidence of how they were implicated. And yet, how many of them are sitting in jail? How many of them are still holding positions and have not faced the consequences of what they have been doing? So what the organization does to hold to account, and I want to quickly bring it back. Last week, we had the civil society organization gathering. Many of the representatives are here, called Dialogue in Action, where we are trying to bring together these entities, break down the barriers and silos, and form together as a network. During this event, Barend Lagranci stated, if you have money, you go to the court if there's an issue. If you don't have the money, you go to the streets and you protest. And there's a third way, and that is to mediate. Now, for the organization, what we have found is a pure focus and a strength to look at an issue and a complexity or a challenge or a lack in service delivery. It's multifaceted, right? It's not just maladministration or corruption. But if we find an issue, we can tackle it from a legal point of view. If it has to go to court, such as with electoral reform, we can be a friend of the court and support those that is taken action. But we also have a policy approach. What are the issues with policy? What are the issues and the shortcoming within Parliament? And we can put pressure on Parliament. So it's legal, it's Parliament, and it's collaboration in partnership with other organizations that give us this strength. Because all of us, our resources are limited. Many of us are dependent on civil society, citizens, and businesses to fund and donate us. So unless we stand together, we won't have that capacity to take it on from different sides and push towards the change we want to see effected.
Thanks for that input, Rachel. Stemming from that input, Atolile, you are from the movement for collective action and racial equity, movement for care. And I know you spoke about issues of actual care, the word care in relation to solidarity. But this word collective reflects what you said earlier about the need for some sort of a united front to challenge the crisis. Perhaps you can expand a little bit on both the aspects of solidarity and collective action. What does that look like for you? And then we're going to take a few inputs from the audience, and we'll get 30-second roundups from everyone here.
Thank you. We have a country whose history, a history of the country that was built on division. We divided on the basis of race. The inequalities that exist are also inequalities that divide us, also on the basis of class as well, as people. And again, these inequalities and these divisions are happening in all sectors of society. Collective action means that we have to take notice and take care of all these issues that many of us have spoken to here. I know there's going to be a lot of talk about ESCOM and load shedding today, and that's because load shedding affects us all. But what doesn't affect us all is access to electricity. You might be load shedded. That means you are privileged because you have access to electricity. And so when we talk about collective action, we need to stand up for those who don't even have access to electricity, because those are suffering the most. They're not only affected by the fact that they don't have access to electricity, they're also affected by load shedding, even though they don't have access to electricity, because their places of employment might not have electricity, and therefore they might lose jobs. They might not be employed. And so collective action has to bring us together. We need to come together as people and participate. And the best way, one of the best way I saw that, and I was involved in that, and I think someone is going to speak to that today, was through community action networks in 2020 in Cape Town during COVID-19. When political leaders took leave at the time that they were needed the most. We couldn't reach ward councillors when we wanted them in 2020 during COVID-19. The only people who represent the state that we could interact with were the police and the army. At a time where we needed political leaders that center care in terms of the politics that we needed at the time. At that time, different individuals, different community organizations came together and formed community action networks. And community action networks that did not work in isolation. I got to engage with people, even though I'm in Cape Town, I got to engage with people in Gugulethu that I've never engaged with through these community action networks. I got to engage with people in Philippi, with people in the CBD that also started community action networks. And part of that included this issue of mutual aid, understanding that some of us have privileges. And therefore, there were community action networks in poor communities that were partnered with community action networks in more affluent middle-class communities that had to work together because we don't have the same resources. These are the inequalities that I talk about. And so that's the type of collective action and that's the type of solidarity that we need to start to build in order to move forward. Thank you.
Thanks for that. And I think what we're starting to hear is that irrespective of the issue, it would have been COVID then, now it could be electricity or access to electricity or healthcare. There's a need to begin forming these scans or community action networks that can begin looking at different aspects of the crisis. And that's the kind of model for organization that's beginning to emerge. We're going to take, I'm told by the program director that we are running out of time, but I'm going to take one or two quick comments. And if you could center your comments on what must be done to fix South Africa. So how do we prevent collapse? You're supposed to say here, prevent state collapse, unite to fix South Africa. What does that mean? And you have 30 seconds to make your input very quickly before moving to the next person. Can we get someone to assist just with the roving mic? If I can see hands. There's a hand in the corner there. Okay, and a hand there.
Hi, good day. My name is Lorenzo Wakefield. I've been, for this last while, hearing a lot about how we're currently in a failed state. And I've been questioning a failed state for who and why at this moment. I've been hearing it because the state's failing middle-class people, because load shedding, and if you're in Johannesburg, which is where I live, there's also no water at times. But the state has failed people living in poverty for a very long time. When we've not had load shedding, they've had load reduction. When they have to go and walk to get water somewhere, we've had water running out of our taps. And so my question is, how do we actually bring this about in terms of cross-class solidarity? Because when poor people protest, the middle class stands back or sees it as an inconvenience or don't want to be part of it. And I think in terms of that, I think we need to think about what we do better as middle class people to actually have better solidarity structures.
So cross-class solidarity coming out is one view, and one, I suppose the speakers could look at that as well in their closing inputs. We've got a hand there and one more hand there.
Ladies and gentlemen, non-binary community, everybody observed. Thank you so much to our panelists today. My name is Gama Cuba. Super excited about the meeting and super excited that we're seeing young people. Big up to Tessa. Can you give her a round of applause for the work she's doing with her team and everybody? With all respect. I think my collaboration, my contribution would be, how do we drive localism, at the bottom basic level? Because sometimes traditional politics have the tendency of straying far from the community. I hear a lot of aristocratic terminology that struggles to be contextualized, to the everyday person, seeing the educational levels of South Africa. And to Tessa, there is a term for trauma in isiXhosa. It's called ukuphalala. And General DeBille here said, ukuphalala is so related to phalaphala. And let's talk about that as well. And so with that said, at least I didn't steal your joke here. So I think with that said, it's not only just a matter of us throwing educational jargon. Politics is beyond, oratory skills. But politics is actually feeling the lived experiences of people beyond the research, beyond the research experiences. And localization is really about experiencing people. And I think, with a lot of respect, we need to be into the people's lives. Thank you so much.
Thanks for that input. So localization, local struggles, local politics. One hand there, and there's one more hand on the side.
Thank you so much to the panelists for a very informative discussion. My name is Nkanyi. So I think one of the issues that I wanted to raise, we are a society that inherited a society that is full of violence. And what we've known for a very longest time is that we always respond with violence, of which I think now on how we need to respond. Like for example now in Port St. John's, in one of the communities, there is a civil war that is actually taking place right now, where communities are actually fighting each other because of the theft of the animals and so on and so forth. Of which peace and security is one of the issues that we also need to rise above amongst all the other issues that we are facing. Of course, we have a number of issues, load shedding. I think all the other speakers have already mentioned those issues, that I think we also need to inform and educate each other so that we can be able to be united in addressing these issues as the civil society is actually rising up to address these issues. Lastly, I think the media needs to play a quite an important role, because sometimes when there are certain issues that is happening in Eastern Cape, it doesn't get the same attention as the issue that is happening in Johannesburg or here in Cape Town. So media, we urge media to continue to report on these issues. Like for example, maybe there are few people that actually know that there is a civil war that is happening in Majolo and Port St. John's. Yet the mayors, they continue to rise and speak about these issues, so media must continue to inform about these issues so that they could also trend, but not trend for us to be able to actually rise and address these issues when they trend.
Thank you. So methodology of struggle, how do we respond to unfolding violence and issues of media and coverage? One more comment, 30 seconds, and then we're going to go to the speakers for their very quick inputs.
Yes, Kira, my name is Andre Young. I want to use the analogy shared with me by a colleague, that South Africa is like an IT system. We built the hardware for the last few years since '94, but the software, we didn't change it. And you heard my colleague there say violence. So the software is still pre the build. My question to you guys is, what's going to trigger the software for 60 million South Africans so that we can live in harmony?
Thanks.
Because the lack of harmony is what you've described as the state of the nation. But the key issue is, how do we tip the software to run in the hardware platform that creates this utopia that I've heard you voice as a panel?
Thanks for that. So looking at the perhaps moral characteristics and the responses of people at a very human level. Panelists, you have 1 minute each. Let's start with Rachel, Akolile, and then we end off with Tessa.
Okay, I believe we each have our strengths and our focus areas to respond to. If I can take on the middle class issue, my co-panelists have explained their own lived experiences so well. From my side, I would say don't run away. My experience again is how many of my friends have immigrated and left the country. They've given up, they've gone, this is no longer their problem. And if more people could just stay or come back and become part of the solution, that is something I feel so strongly about. On the safety and the security, it's very easy also to speak of it in a broader context, but to bring it back to the individual, a big problem we have in South Africa is the protection of whistleblowers. If it weren't for whistleblowers, we would not have known of state capture and the extent of the rot that came from it. But very practically, this past week, it was due to people potentially within the board of South Africa Tourism that leaked the information of this 1 billion rand deal to Tottenham Hotspurs. And now, the chairperson of that same board indicated that it was their fiduciary duty to keep information confidential, information within the public's interest. So there's no protection then for whistleblowers. If it weren't for them, the Portfolio Committee for Tourism would not have taken the minister to task yesterday. So we need to look at the individuals that are willing to put their lives at risk for the public's interest.
So it's a year before elections. And again, it's going to be a busy year politically. But I think we fall in the trap of only thinking about our democracy as electoral democracy. If we are to continue keeping politicians and those we put into power to account, we need to embrace and make sure that our participatory democracy is active, and that we are active throughout the lifespan of those that we elect. We are not going to be able to get anywhere if we expect 400 people in parliament to make decisions for us during that 5 years. We are not going to get anywhere if we expect 230 or 31 councillors in the city of Cape Town to make decisions for us throughout that 5 years. We need to make sure that we participate in those spaces that exist for us to participate, so that we are able to make those decisions, because that's what our constitution is centered on participatory democracy. The budget needs to be decided by us, not by 225 or 230 people. The almost or just over 400 million citizens of Cape Town need to be the one that decide for the budget. And so that's something that I'd like to encourage all of us. It's important to vote, but it doesn't start and end there. Let's continue participating beyond just putting an X on a ballot. Thank you.
So I'm going to start by saying it's not just about putting an X on the ballot, but I do want to put an X on the ballot. And that's how I'm going to conclude from my side, is that yes, accountability is important. Yes, participatory democracy is vital. Democracy must be a daily endeavor by everybody who likes democracy. Daily. Ask yourself daily, how have I participated in this democracy today? But the ballot also matters. And next year is 2024. And as much as people have been saying 2024 is going to be a big year, I don't believe that. I think 2023 is the make or break year. We decide this election this year, not next year. Because this is the time that we need to take to, number one, decide what will be on the ballot next year. Not who, what. What are the issues, what are the solutions, what are the things that we care about that we are going to have in exchange for our vote? Before the politicians come and sell us dreams, let's put plans together and tell them, if you don't support this plan, you don't get my vote. Done. I'm the person who hires, you are the person who wants the job. This is what you're going to have to do to get the job, to get my vote. So what is on the ballot? What are the issues we're going to rally around and we're going to care about and that we're going to exchange for our vote? Rev Chikane calls it the People's Manifesto. We must have a manifesto of our own before their manifesto comes out. The second thing is who is going to be on the ballot. We are not limited in options in South Africa. Even now, as it stands, we've got over 300 parties, over 1,000 independents. We're not limited for options. But if they're the wrong options, we can change that by putting other people on the ballot. We're not in some sort of frozen mode where we can't put people on the ballot. So me, I want to put X on the ballot. I'm going to work towards that thing this year, so that I have the right kind of people who are accountable to me on that ballot and who aren't accountable to some political boss somewhere. And then the final thing I want to say is about the solidarity question. Radical solidarity is necessary now, and the people in this room can do it. What do I mean by radical? I mean we have to care about issues that don't bother us if we're going to change this country. Inequality isn't just an economic thing. We have inequality in activism and ideas. We only care about the things that affect us. We can no longer be those people. If you don't know what affects somebody else, go and find out. And if they are struggling to fight for that thing, resource their struggle. Stand with their struggle. Be in their struggle. Fight for their struggle. But if you have any amount of privilege that this country has afforded you, your job before now and into eternity is to share your privilege with others in solidarity with issues that don't pertain to you. Because nobody wanna see us together. Nobody wanna see us together. Nobody, no, 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 no. No, 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 no. No, 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 no. Nobody wanna see us together. Nobody wanna see us together. Nobody, no, 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 no. No, 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 no. Let me tell you about the story of my life. My mother was a kitchen girl. My father was a garden boy. That's why I am an activist. You wanna know the story of my life? My mother was a kitchen girl. My father was a garden boy. That's why I am an activist.
Thank you.
Yabba, 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 yabba.
Thank you. Thank you to our panelists who are grassroots activists but are also national leaders. Thank you so much.
As I said to Zakira, you don't need some big names, some big celebrity names. These are the leaders that this country needs tomorrow. And I'm glad that, as I said, that amongst them are many who would be looking at contesting that 2024 elections. As I said, coming to the airport, there's this thing that says trust is earned. But James Baldwin writes, I can't believe what you say because I see what you do. And it's on that basis that trust is earned. If you do the right things, you will generate the trust. That trust is not going to come from insisting that because you have blue lights, you can force everybody off the roads. That trust is not going to come through vanity projects like flags and funding spurs, which I think the mistake they made was not to have gone for Liverpool or Manchester, you know. You might not have had the national uproar. But what I like about this, you know, sometimes we think we're powerless. But if you take both of those instances, the flag and this Tottenham Hotspur thing, was just the sheer anger of South Africans that forced those decisions to be reversed. And I think we need to find the issues around which we can galvanize that kind of support to force the change that on the issues that we think are most important here. I want to also apologize. There were no red carpets for all of you here. We invited all members of parliament, all members of the provincial legislature in Cape Town, all the councillors here. I just want to check whether any of them have come today. Any member of parliament? Just introduce yourself, sir. Thank you so much for your presence here. Any other councillor, member of parliament, member of the provincial legislature? No. So that makes you an exception. Thank you. Thank you for your presence. I think nothing epitomizes more a country in crisis than the burnt-out building next to us here. Over a year now. Burnt. Anywhere else in the world, this would have moved heaven and earth to have restored this. But not done. We have Nkululeko Mtambo from Defend Our Democracy to come and read a memorandum that has already been submitted to the President's office and for which we have acknowledgement. But more importantly, to also see the vast array of organizations who have supported this particular memorandum. Nkululeko? No, you must read it up here. Not there in the dark corners.
Thank you. I got significantly more comfortable when the singing began. If you'll allow me to be even more comfortable. Amandla, awethu, ilizwe, mayibuye, iAfrika. Sibonge, comrades. The memorandum reads thusly. Dear Mr. President, on the 9th of February 2023, you will deliver the State of the Nation address. This year's SONA comes as the country faces rolling blackouts, a large-scale collapse in local government functionality in various municipalities, enduring corruption and state capture, political leaders who remain in powerful positions despite being named and shamed in the Zondo Commission report, the ill effects of state institutions plagued by years of malfeasance and repurposing of personal or political gains. Criminal networks, gangs, and mafia operators in various sectors, continued attacks aimed at whistleblowers and honest public servants, poor economic growth, an electoral system that doesn't allow the public to hold elected representatives accountable, a broken passenger rail infrastructure system, a disturbing level of wastage of public resources, which is almost treasonous when people are going hungry in our country. A case in point is the recent proposition to pay an overseas soccer team, Tottenham Hotspur's, 1 billion rand. Nationalist and xenophobic mobilization presenting a growing threat, sabotage and acts of destabilization now being a regular part of our political vocabulary, and a growing national sentiment that the country is in a state of crisis. This period requires visible and effective leadership at all levels. While we have seen leadership in the form of community activists, humanitarian workers, and ordinary South Africans who have risen to the occasion, we have been let down by our political leaders. We would have hoped that you, Mr. President, and members of your cabinet would have been addressing the nation daily on the energy crisis, reporting back on the plans in place, and what accountability measures and consequences should you fail in this regard, but this has not been the case. Instead, we have all been left literally and figuratively in the dark. It gives us the impression, which we hope is not true, that there is simply no plan to deal with the enormity of the crisis the country faces. As you address the nation at the opening of Parliament, we urge you to ensure that you honestly reflect on the severity of the problems that beset the country. We hope that there will be no whitewashing in the role of the government, both the previous and current administration under your leadership, in creating these problems or simply not dealing with them. In the 2022 SONA, you committed to remain focused on the priorities identified in the SONA of 2021, which were overcoming COVID-19, a massive roll-up of infrastructure, a substantial increase in local production, an employment stimulus to create jobs and support livelihoods, and the rapid expansion of our energy generation capacity. On the response to the pandemic, we acknowledge the role played by government in responding to the pandemic and its impact. However, in the tracking of COVID relief fund worth 5 billion rand, the Auditor General's report found that nearly 30,000 relief grants required further investigation. The report found that the price of personal protective equipment was, in instances, inflated by 1,000%. There was a diversion of funds and a rigging of tenders. By 2022, the Special Investigative Unit found almost half the tenders awarded were irregular. On massive rollout of infrastructure, the South African Institute of Civil Engineering highlighted the failures of infrastructure in 2022 in the State of Infrastructure report as significant enough for South Africa to be at risk of becoming a failed state. Again, it is all too easy to speak to the unconscionable level of corruption that brings about these results, such as the Passenger Rail Agency of South Africa finding more than 3,000 ghost workers believed to have received millions of rands in salaries, while our railways lines still are barely functional. On substantial increase in local production. As infrastructure continues to be dysfunctional, so local production breaks down. The South African Reserve Service found that the year-to-date report, the preliminary trade balance surplus of 14.67 billion rand was a deterioration from the 45.21 billion trade surplus for the comparable period in 2021. Exports increased by 7.3% year-on-year, whilst imports increased by 31.4% over the same time period. This only means that there is an increased dependency on foreign product. On employment stimulus to create jobs and support livelihoods. According to Stats SA, in the third quarter of 2022, the unemployment rate in South Africa reached 27.9% among workers aged 35 to 44, with the youth, who are the largest labor force we have, experiencing an unemployment rate nearly 60%. On the rapid expansion of our energy generation capacity, South Africa is teetering on the edge of a state of disaster. We convey the depth of our disappointment in the government on the energy crisis, given that the problem was predicted in the 1998 Energy White Paper and was flagged by nearly every administration since. The load shedding schedule was first introduced in 2007 and in its 15th year with no end in sight. What is clear from all the above is that each of these priority areas, there has been either further calamity, scandal, or deterioration. Thus, Mr. President, we call on you to outline a credible and practical plan for action in relation to dealing with the energy crisis. Indicate what are the accountability transparency measures that will be put in place so that cost, corruption, and environmentally detrimental energy deals are not simply pushed through. Specify who is responsible for implementing the energy plan and what will happen if there is failure in this regard. Detail how government intends to help small and medium-sized businesses against the effects of load shedding. Outline what measures will be taking place against members of the cabinet implicated in the Zondo Commission report. Update the country on where the government is in implementation of the Zondo Commission report recommendations. Instruct the SIU to probe potential health sector corruption at all public hospitals across the country. Detail what the government is doing in relation to fixing our railways and ensuring that PRASA is protected from further corruption and capture. Commit to meaningful and credible electoral reform for the 2029 elections, preceded by genuine national dialogue and consultation. Outline the plan to reduce the youth unemployment rate. Outline what is national government going to do in the long term to arrest the failure of municipalities and the collapse of public infrastructure. Outline how far government practically is in ensuring strengthening of whistleblower support and protection. Detail what is being done to capacitate law enforcement to deal with sabotage, destabilization, and organized crime networks. Commit to a timeline to ensure clean, flowing water and sanitation across the country, particularly in rural areas, and to repair water infrastructure in urban centers. Put a halt to the Tottenham Hotspur deal. Provide an update on what has been done to ensure consequences for those behind the July 2021 insurrection, to ensure the government's plans are transparent and that the public is afforded means of monitoring and implementation of such. South Africa is, in fact, in a state of crisis on many fronts. As power stations continue to collapse along with railways and reservoirs, so too do the hopes and dreams of our nation. We urge you, Mr. President, to present a sober account of the state of the nation, to put forward a plan to lift us out of our spiraling crisis, and to accept that if these failures do not end, the buck stops with you. This memorandum has been endorsed by the Active Citizens Movement, Africa Brand Summit, Ahmed Kathrada Foundation, the Anglican Church Diocese of Saldanha Bay, Applause Arts Initiative, ASRI NPC, Business Ecology, Cape Town Ulama Board, Cape Windless Environmental Action, CATEC, Center for Good Governance and Social Justice NPC, Congregational Church Western Cape, Congress of Business and Economics, Cups, Cakes and Bakes, Debt for Climate South Africa, Defend Our Democracy, Dynamic Stability, ELCSA Cape Church, Equal Education Law Center, Faded Black Innovations, Freedom Under Law, Future Left, Get Informed YDC, Guguletu Can, Helen Suzman Foundation, Institute for African Alternatives, Institute for Social and Corporate Ethics, isiZiba Community-Based Organization of South Africa, Johannesburg Institute for Social Services, Krishna Rabilal Foundation, Legal Resources Center, Lens Politics, Letsema Center for Development and Democracy, Makua Rand West City Branch, Lincoln Mead Residents and Ratepayers Associations, Mere Bank KRF, Moravian Church in SA, Msunduzi Association of Residents, Ratepayers and Civics, Msunduzi Economic Development Agency, Muslim Judicial Council, One South Africa Movement, Open Secrets, Organization Undoing Tax Abuse, Parliament Monitoring Group, Public Affairs Research Institute, Progress Tamil Movement, Redwood Wealth, Rondebosch United Church, CIRAG, Section 27, Solidarity, South African Church Leadership Initiative, South African Communist Party, South African Conservatives, South African Council of Churches Western Cape, South African Faith Communities Environment Institute, South African Muslim Network, Survivors of State Capture at the South African Revenue Service Support Group, Evangelical Alliance of South Africa, the Muslim Youth Movement of South Africa, the Poetry Hub, the Sophia Network, the Sophia Foundation, the Whistleblower House, Top Quartile Project Services Africa, Unite Behind, United Front of Civics, Visual International, Vulindlela Youth Development Institute, SA First Forum, 350africa.org, Corruption Watch, Council for the Advancement of South African Constitution, and IMASA. I thank you.
Just tell me, was there a cupcake mentioned there? Cupcake. Okay. All right. Many of you might not know that's the more affectionate name for the president that some people use. So that's the memorandum that's gone off. If there are organizations here who still want to add your names to it, and it can go on to the online version, and that would be welcome. We get to the part of the program where there are different sectors who will respond to the memorandum, who will give their messages of support, and these sectors have 3 minutes. Now, when 3 minutes are up, please drown them out with your applause. So that they don't overstay their time. I'm going to just read through the list, and if you could start coming up. Francesca de Gasparis from SABC, Sheikh Ihsan Talib, the MJC, Kowani Similani, the Green Connection, Luko Nozaza, Equal Education. Treatment Action Campaign is here. But the speaker isn't as yet. Pamela Silwane, Guguletu Ken, Nick Benedel from Business, Matthew Parks from COSATU, Soli Mapiela from the South African Communist Party, and Zaki Ahmad. So in that order, if I could just ask you to please come forward, and your 3 minutes starts now.
Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. I'm just going to move this piece of white paper. Thank you for the invitation to share our contribution as a faith-based environmental justice organization and talk about the challenges as we see them. We've been hearing a lot about the crisis we're facing in South Africa. The voices of the youth show us the way forward, what is needed and what is lacking. It's been a privilege for me to listen and learn from the panel that spoke before. I learned a lot, thank you. The organization that I'm representing is the Southern African Faith Communities Environment Institute, also known as SABC. We work with and for people of faith, all faiths and none, for ecological and climate justice. So I've been invited to speak about the climate crisis that we're facing, which is already impacting our lives. And it will impact every aspect of our lives, from our jobs, to our education, to our health, to our economics. And as we know, what we do to our environment will be wrought upon ourselves. That is the prophetic voice of the climate justice movement. This climate crisis is in our hands, and it is about how we use our natural resources and how we live our daily lives. Our political leadership are tasked with addressing the development of our country, as we all know, using the levers of our constitution, parliament, and government institutions. Their job is to provide these basic services of delivery that we keep hearing are not happening. They need to plan and address the challenges we face and use policy to ensure smooth running of our economy. When SABC and Earthlife Africa took the government to court over its R1 trillion nuclear deal in 2017. That was to stop a corrupt and illegal deal with Russia, which would have bankrupted the country. We're now being told that our current energy crisis is costing about R1 billion a day in the formal economy. This does not include the true cost of poor energy decision-making and planning. We are externalizing the impact by relying on crisis management and being in this permanent state of emergency, which impacts most on those most vulnerable, as we've heard, on our mental states, and the feeling that we can each actually make a difference. So when we look at the energy crisis and weak governance, We're looking at policies that are inadequate. We realize that ESCOM literally cannot deliver what its mandate is. It is unable to afford to deliver affordable and reliable electricity. So when we look at an impossible situation like this, we realize there must be action taken by the government because it's undermining the very fabric of our society and our capacity. So recently, the Green Connection and SABC took the government to court to say, please start doing proper energy planning. This isn't something we made up. It's part of the Energy Act of 2008. There's a section called Section 6, which is called the Integrated Energy Plan, that the government just has decided not to implement. If we had that in place, we would be seeing annual plans which would address things like load shedding. It would address things like the affordability of our electricity. Instead, we heard this evening, just before I came on the stage, that the President and the Minister of Energy and Mineral Resources, Gwede Mantashe, are both opposing our request for them to implement their very own legislation. So whatever the President says tomorrow, remember that. He has chosen privately to oppose actual energy planning that they're meant to do. We keep on having to take the government to court because it's refusing to do its job. And that's something that we all can do something about. We're here in the People's Cathedral, and we must remember the past leadership that brought us here, that brought us being able to speak truth to power, such as Archbishop Desmond Tutu. We are here to encourage each other to raise our voices and to create a better sense of solidarity among ourselves, to fully understand the crisis, as I've been telling you, the energy and climate crisis that we're looking at, and to see what we can do collectively. We should not be daunted by the task at hand, but steadfast in our determination for justice. I think my 3 minutes are up. Thank you.
Mr. Program Director, ladies and gentlemen, I greet you all in the name of peace and in Islam. Assalamu alaikum. The peace and blessings of God Almighty upon all of you. And there my screen disappeared. I feel very honored this evening in an august house of worship, such as the St. George's Cathedral, to on this occasion reference a narrative in the Holy Quran, which is located within the context of the story and the struggle between David and Goliath. And so God Almighty says that had it not been for His grace, that He in fact keeps one group of people in check by virtue of another, had that not been God's law, then corruption would have spread throughout the earth. But God's bounty is abundantly spread on the earth. And so from here, the principle of accountability is addressed. And our considerations on this occasion, as we are trying to share with one another as citizens, as well as bringing some thoughts to the attention of our President, is to speak to the principle of accountability being at the core of democratic dispensation. Democracy minus accountability is equivalent to the law of the jungle and eventually to rebellion and anarchy. Those in power who steal and plunder with abandon shall never change course unless their power status is curtailed. Ironically, corrupt politicians are at the mercy of citizens, yet we repeatedly vote the same corrupt politicians to power whilst being content with little, if any, accountability. The closed-list proportional representation system is archaic and designed to alienate the electorate from demanding accountability from elected office bearers. Political parties across the political spectrum are showing zero demonstrable political will to yield to the clamor of citizens for electoral reform that will make elected office bearers directly accountable to citizens. As head of state, President Ramaphosa, we ask you to commit yourself and your government to electoral reform that will ensure the restoration of the citizens' right to remove corrupt politicians from office through their vote. We want accountability to the electorate and not to political parties alone. Despite the ruling of unconstitutionality of the Electoral Act in its current form, Parliament has done everything in its power to derail and thwart this very intent of the constitutional ruling. President Ramaphosa, we await to see demonstrable political will in the promotion of the primary concern of universal suffrage and commitment to the Freedom Charter that claims that the people shall govern. Thank you very much.
Amandla, away too. Comrades, in front of you, I've put out posters for you to best understand what is the situation, the current situation taking place within this country of ours called South Africa. Today, I'd like to introduce myself as Kolwane Simelani, Advocacy Officer within the Green Connection. The reason why we find ourselves here today is simply because our government has failed to plan. And if we fail to plan, we plan to fail, inevitably, in any kind of system. As my colleague Francesca has said today, the Green Connection has launched a court case to take President Cyril Ramaphosa to court, including Minister Gwede Mantashe. Section 6 of the National Energy Act, as she has pointed out, is an integrated energy plan, which is a roadmap towards how we deal with the energy investment within this country, policy development within this country. And those are two key fundamentals that need to take place within this country of ours. We need policy. We also need infrastructure finance, right? You'll hear people speak of an economy, but the big question or the fallacy is that which economy are we talking about when people only speak about their own, when people only have vested interests within political parties as opposed to serving the people? Today I stand before you, my comrades are in France, to address President Macron on stopping Total Energies from exploiting and exploring our oceans within this country. We also have been standing in the consulate here in Cape Town to speak about stopping or halting all offshore oil and gas projects within this country. Most of you would sit here and ask, why are they talking about stopping things from the ocean? I'm from Johannesburg. The first thing when I come to Cape Town and think about is the ocean. The very same ocean that we need to protect, me as a black person, there's certain rituals I have to do when I'm in the ocean. There's certain animals within the ocean we need to respect. There are certain things we need to be considerate of within protecting this ocean of ours. So I stand here today to ask or answer the question as to why we are here today. We are here because of a failed government. We need to move forward past thinking about politicians, but taking into account our own selves and our own actions at the end of the day. For every action, there's a reaction. Last words, we need to mobilize, organize, conscientize.
I think it's like, I think so. Oh, hulumende uyadlala ngathi. Uthasifune sihambe ngenyawo. Hulumende uyadlala ngathi. Oh, hulumende uyadlala ngathi. Oh, hulumende uyadlala ngathi. Good evening to everyone who's here. My name is Ulu Konozaza from Etanokulu High School, and I'm an equalizer of equal education, fighting for quality and equality in education in South Africa. I am standing here on behalf of my fellow equalizers, and I want to speak about what we want to see the government doing for us, and which is giving us the well-deserving education. Okay. Okay. So I wanted to say that we need better learning conditions, as what we have is currently heartbreaking. We have got children who walk kilometers to get to school in KZN. We have got children who study under trees in Eastern Cape. Not to forget that we have got overcrowded schools in Gauteng. And I could speak a lot about that, but I need to cut my time short. Honestly, we were promised a lot by the government, and still those promises were not fulfilled till today. And also that the conditions that we study under are not bearable, to the point that some people drop out of school. And now thinking about how is South Africa going to look with a lot of dropouts, and how is the economy going to grow with dropouts in South Africa? Now, what we're looking at is what we're looking for is a secured education, quality education, and equal education in South Africa. And please remember that we are the future of South Africa. And now, do you think that with the type of quality of education we have in South Africa, how will we get South Africa going upper levels? Okay, now touch basing on the ESCOM effect, how do you think that we study under, on load shedding? We have matriculants that need to study for their exams, that we have load shedding effects. How do you think the computer labs periods go through? And it is very difficult to prepare for school in the mornings when there's load shedding cut off. There are people waking up at 6 o'clock, and there's exactly that time is a schedule for load shedding. Let me close. Please think of the children who are suffering there, and do not forget that they are supposedly one of you. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I am Pamela Silwana from the Gugulethu Can, and I'll be representing community. Firstly, I'll talk about my community. Gugulethu is a warm community that has a lot of diversity. We are a community full of light and different cultures. We are a community that can stand together, and we have proved that through lockdown, when a pandemic that was unknown came and threatened our livelihood. We were able to mobilize each other and take care of each other. To me, that showed me the strength and humanity that exists. It showed us that we have new leaders and can help support them better in our community. It was added benefit when we could attract other communities to be part of what we were doing in our community. That was being part of Cape Town Together. The current situation in Gugulethu. A few weeks ago, we lost an activist who has helped us establish a lot of activism in Gugulethu. His name was Ntsikelelo Msweswe. His death was not an accident. Boys and young men are dying because of mass shooting. Many mothers are crying for their children and police presence is not visible. We are told there are not enough resources to help our community feel safe. I love my community, but I would love to feel much safer. After lockdown and the corona pandemic, we have seen so much crime getting out of hand, and we see no police. Even if we see police, we still do not feel safe. Do we not deserve safe homes? We recently had a march for the city facilities that were closed down, rugby facilities, swimming pools being closed down. Places that would usually keep our children active were quickly getting closed. Where should our kids play? Where should they spend their time? Is it purposely done so that our children can turn to drugs and alcohol? We have seen new leaders and civil society coming together to help better our communities, to help the unemployed, to help adults find work. But more and more in our community, we see the numbers. When they say the statistics are high, we know the numbers. We know the girl that studied and passed her degree but is sitting at home. What can be done? We have to ask ourselves as communities, who are we? Why are we here? What can we become? We find ourselves in a state that has corrupt leaders, looting of state resources. What role can we play as society? The only person who can stand in our way is ourselves. We need to rise up on the standard that we are used to and come with solutions that rebuild us rather than divide us. Solutions that bring back power rather than take away from the little that we have. We need to be courageous if we want a better quality of life. Courage doesn't mean you have to be on the forefront. It means that you have to stand up for the truth, what is wrong. We need to put our leaders to accountability for leading us because they are responsible for leading us. I call on everyone that is here, even if you're not from Gugulethu, you are a community, I am a community, but together we are a community, and together we are stronger.
Good evening, everybody. My name's Nick Binadell. It's a privilege for me to be here with you. I speak not today as a formal representative of business, but as someone who's spent my professional life working with business. I want to start by saying that it seems to me that the growth of the economy is becoming the oxygen of democracy. That if we don't grow this economy and we don't create the jobs that we need, bearing in mind in November another 1 million students left school or university, and that the Reserve Bank forecasts our growth rate this year will be 0. So growth is the oxygen of democracy. Without growth, we don't create jobs. Without growth, there's no extra tax. Without tax, there's no more transformation. And without confidence, there's no investment. And so in the business community, the economy sits critically interdependent with the politics, the government, and civil society. We should focus on the economy with a lot more clarity and dedication. We should all understand how an economy like South Africa works, where it doesn't work, and how it should work in the fastest changing world that we've ever seen. As I study governments around the world, I see governments that add value to society, and I see governments that destroy value in society. We don't see much of the damage in education because it's not visible like electricity. But for the youngsters in this room, their future depends on the quality of education. And 1 hour lost by a student is an hour never recovered. That's what load shedding really does. Every stage of load shedding is a stage too many. Every home that doesn't get water, drinkable water regularly, is a home too many. Any road with more potholes is a road too many. Any home, any hospital without health care that patients need is a hospital too many. And these, as has been said, are crises. This is not a slight problem, it's a crisis, and it requires a very different response. Tomorrow we will hear the government claim that it is working hard on improving things. But when we look at the real data, the real information about the performance of government, it's actually in decline. It's not working hard, it's hardly working. We may ask ourselves, what is the state of our economy? The experts can tell us. There is no growth, there's very little investment, there's huge poverty. 20 million South Africans without the support of a grant would live not just unbearable lives, but intolerable lives. What kind of society has 1/3 of its population surviving on a grant? Inequality is growing. We're one of the most unequal economies in the world, but under this condition of performance by the government, the inequality will grow, and those who have will have more, and those who have less will have less. Let me conclude by saying the partnership between business, labor, and civil society depends on the link between politics, government, the economy, and us as citizens. If we don't work together, we will all fail separately. Thank you.
Good evening, Program Director. Good evening, colleagues, friends, distinguished guests, comrades. I think all protocol observed. My name is Matthew Parks. I'm from an organization called COSATU, the Congress of South African Trade Unions. So I think we just want to appreciate that you've invited COSATU today just to share our views with this important rally in support of our constitutional democracy. I think our stance is that we all need to defend and enrich our democracy. It's not a static creature, but it's an evolving democracy that grows as we also mature as a society, and it requires all of us to contribute towards it. I think one of the mistakes we're making, Program Director, is that we continue to treat democracy as simply a festival of party t-shirts on election day, and then we outsource our responsibilities to government afterwards. I think the experience of the past decade of state capture has taught us the dangers and the fallacies of such an abdication of responsibilities by ourselves. COSATU is a member of the Alliance. It might not be very popular right now. But we do believe that the President, Comrade Cyril Ramaphosa, has done well on many fronts under very difficult circumstances, including just getting some of the basics rebuilt, restoring a sense of law and order, accountability, beginning a process to appoint competent persons to the NPA, to SARS, etc., removing some of the most compromised ministers from cabinet, rebuilding the South African Revenue Service. And those are good, but much, much more needs to be done, and we simply don't have the luxury of time anymore. We need to see a coherent and a united ANC, cleanse of the demons of corruption and factionalism, an ANC that once again will become a center of progress. I think Comrade Solly Mapaila is here. We need to support the South African Communist Party as a home for the left, to continue to be the watchdog upon the state when it makes mistakes, but also to push all of us to a more fair and equitable society, not one based upon treating workers like glorified slaves. We've all been discussing Eskom and Transnet and Metro Rail. We need to see our state-owned enterprises, which once were world-renowned, being rebuilt, given the necessary support so they can once again become enablers of economic growth. We've been talking about local government being the face of communities with the state, where then we need to start with competent councillors, not persons who get involved in hiring assassins. We need a plan to rebuild a collapsing municipal sector. And democracy is not just about ballots. I think, as a colleague Nick was saying from business, it's about the constitutional rights to water, to sanitation, to electricity, to housing, to roads, to dignity. I think we must also be a little bit frank amongst ourselves too, because it's fine, we must spank government. Government must do many things. And when they make mistakes, we must hold them accountable. But our colleagues in business must also play their role. We must expose those persons in the business sector who dry Eskom with inflated prices, who rob it with substandard coal. We should be talking about ending the apartheid wage gap, unless we think it's morally correct that the CEO of a mining company can make 300 million rand in a year, yet want to argue with mine workers who seek a simple 150 rand increase. I think we also need to see the religious sector also raising its voice against frauds who seek to abuse the church for self-enrichments. I think we need to give more support to the NGOs who speak out against corruption, the denial of socio-economic rights. But maybe also lastly, conclusion, Chair, I think citizens too must also play their role, which includes paying Eskom for our electricity bills, municipal bills, protecting our schools, our railway infrastructure, our electricity power stations in our community. As unions too, we must also play a role in bringing democracy to our workplaces, building a social compact. I think lastly, Chair, that we're approaching a thing called elections next year. I think it's going to be very interesting to say the least. It'll be the era of coalitions. It's going to be difficult, uncharted territory. So it's going to require all of us to listen to each other, to find each other. Our crises are simply too great for any one of us to resolve on our own. So it requires all of us to make our respective contributions and at times to compromise. Chair, I hope I didn't exploit my 4 minutes, but thanks very much.
Amanda, all power. Thank you very much, Program Director, Comrade Nishan, and greetings to everyone present here. Let me start from the end, given time limitations. The first thing is that we are suffering from a crisis of corrupted political power in our country. Therefore, we need the people to take back their power. We need to transform political power relations in the country, create people's power. In other words, transform parliamentary power as it is today. It's no longer serving the interests of the majority. We have many poor policies in our country and poor policy choices that benefits existing unequal relations in society. In other words, unequal power relations that the intent of national liberation struggle meant to reverse. In this regard, we have overly a dominant capitalist system that concentrates power in the hands of the few and the rich, and it's unable to transform society as a whole. Therefore, the crisis of capitalism is one major source of the problems that we face as a people, as an economy, because you need to understand that economy is concentrated politics. So the economists, that is corporates that control economic power, are able to control politicians. That's why we have to transform both. At the same time, the capitalists are controlled by the ideology of money and making more money. That is why today in the world of crisis, international, not only in South Africa, of course, we are concerned more about our own country. The last few days, the biggest oil companies in the world, ExxonMobil, Chevron, BP yesterday, international, they declared in excess of tens of billions of US rands in profit. When Europe, at the moment, and the world is suffering economic crisis because of gas and oil prices. So let's transform the system that oppresses the people and create a reliable public sector system, people's democracy that can be accountable. Because those who defeated, or when the people took power through the Paris Commune, they created the basic principle: deployment, accountability, and recall. This should happen also in electoral system. So the change for electoral system is more eminent in our country. The Communist Party is leading a process to create a powerful socialist movement of the workers and the poor to transform our society. It's a non-sectarian movement, not even led by the Communist Party. We work together with community action networks in different areas to sort out our problems, not only wait for government. There's a crisis that we face today, the energy crisis. There are major solutions available on the table. If this matter was given to the people, we'll find solutions. We have left it to parliamentarians and business interest groups that do not seek to serve the people but their own pockets and profits. That is why that energy crisis, we know the solutions, we know the problems, but it cannot be resolved. Lastly, is to call for society, for government in particular, as we are calling for its accountability, to create a 24-hour working economy that guarantees 8-hour working day for the workers, and see how far we can tackle this crisis of unemployment and food insecurity amongst our people, and therefore even crime in our communities. As a last point, Chair, in my own community, in my own ward, in fact, we are expanding this to the ward level. At the moment, it's at the street and block levels. Over the last 3 months, we have cut crime by over 80% during the night. We are now going ahead to tackle the day problems of crime, because the community has come together and felt that over-relying on an unworking political and governmental system, they are dying in their hundreds every day. So it's up to the masses to decide. All power. Thank you very much.
Luco, she's still here. I want to say, you said you're the future. You're not the future, you are the present. You are the present. You remind me of Sis Yoliswa Dwane. Now, what I'd like to say is that we have to start looking at our whole world and our home, South Africa. Our world is going through war. It's going through an economic crisis. Our world is going through a situation where in Britain, hundreds of thousands of workers, nurses, ambulance workers have to strike in order to live and to keep people alive. We very often say we are African, but truth is, we do not know the extent of the debt problem on our continent. And we don't know the great examples like in Kenya with solar power. Let us go forward, but let us also speak of what is wrong in our country. We don't have a state of the nation. We have a state of destruction. The state is destroyed. It isn't capable at this stage of providing solutions to the struggle of working people and poor people. It isn't capable of providing services to middle-class people. Our society must take power back. It is both political power and democratic participation at every level. I want to speak of Martha Ngoyi, probably one of the greatest whistleblowers in our country, who exposed billions of rands worth of corruption at PRASA. A rail line that is totally destroyed in Cape Town. The line from Mitchell's Plain to town. The line from Kailicha to town. taking the bulk of the working class and not letting people have affordable public transport. The destruction of the state, let us be honest, has been supported by trade union bureaucracies just as much as it has been destroyed by capital who corrupted officials. Let us say this to you. We want you, Unite Behind invites you to participate in the struggle against corruption. On the 21st of February, we will have a Judicial Services Commission impeachment of a judge who was involved in facilitating corruption at PRASA. A judge, no less. We've also written to Parliament to send to jail the MPs and ministers involved in PRASA's destruction. We wish to say to the City of Cape Town and to the Gauteng Provincial Government, take over PRASA and let us work, let communities work with you to fix it. Now let's talk Eskom. Who here knows Stella Mamecha? He is the power station manager of Tutuka Power Station. Tutuka Power Station is one of those places where a strike was used to support corruption. Tutuka Power Station, he discovered corruption worth 100 million rand a month of diesel. Today, his children have to come home from school with protectors and go to school with protectors. Today, Mr. Mamecha's wife goes to work and she has to go to work with a protector. He has two protectors, and he has to wear a bulletproof jacket to work. So let us speak of Eskom. The other night, I was sitting talking to two clothing workers in Sissigul House, an occupation very often raided by the City of Cape Town and the police. Now let me tell you what those women said. These are among the lowest paid workers in industry. And they are getting 4 days' pay because of load shedding. Women who feed their families. There are many stories like that, and we ask you to join the march tomorrow. Oh, we've been banned from marching by SABC, so we have to have a rally. Let's talk power. We have to build the broadest possible alliance, but such an alliance can only be built on the basis of truth. We shouldn't fear disagreeing with one another, also in public. It is critical that we bring the broadest alliance of people together. It was interesting to hear the South African Conservatives and the South African Communist Party, a party that I'll never join, named in the same word. But I'd like to say to Sally, you have great courage, comrade, and we look forward to working with everyone, including the unions, the South African Communist Party, but business too needs to be honest. Mandla!
I think we've heard from as many sectors as possible. There are many others who wanted to speak, but we couldn't keep you here till midnight. And to all of those who were not able to speak here today, you still have the opportunity of adding your name to the memorandum that will be added online on the DOD social media and websites. To all of our speakers, just our gratitude. To the staff of DOD who've been here in Cape Town for the last few days, just a huge thank you as well. But for all of us who work in Defend Our Democracy, we really came together because Reverend Frank Chikane called us about 2 years ago, almost at this time, and said this country is in crisis. There's a former president that's going to do the most outrageous things to topple this democracy. And we need to think about how we make our voices heard, how we bring people together to defend this democracy, and ultimately, how we ensure that the people of this country are the last line of that democracy and will stand against any threat to that democracy when required. And you saw some of that in July. You saw much of that over the last 2 years. And I think you're seeing it daily in communities across this country. So, Reverend Chikane, thank you for the leadership. Thank you for the inspiration. But reading your response to the Adrian Flock issue, I think reminded us just of the long journey you've been on. And it's regrettable that you still have to be pushing on today. After I don't know how many decades of doing what you've been doing, and the many more decades ahead that we still need you to be pushing us ahead until I think we're out of this crisis. We call on you, Reverend Chikane, to do the closing address, and doing so knowing that this is the 40th anniversary of the UDF, which you helped to give birth to as well. Ladies and gentlemen, Reverend Frank Chikane.
Thank you, Sean. When you start from the UDF to the DOD, it might make other people feel you are just a dinosaur, you know. You've been here all this time and engaged in this struggle, which is very painful. Let me just say, because time is against us, unfortunately, we limit ourselves by prescribing we'll be here from 5 o'clock to 7 o'clock. It's now 1920, which means we have gone beyond the time. I was asked to make closing remarks, and I prepared a text, and I'll tell you what the text says, and for the purposes of those who want the text, they can get it from Nonkululeko Mtambo, the communications officer of the DOD. I just want to say to you, thank you very much for leading us. In this session, Sean and Zakira for the leadership in organizing this session, the real state of the nation. I would like to thank the panelists, the younger generation that was here. I'm pleased actually that they are here. And I'm pleased that they are taking the leadership. And I remember that we were even younger than them when we went into the struggle. And I'm pleased to see the students who are here from the high schools. We wish you all the luck in your struggle, because that's where we started. I started from being forced to do arithmetic and mathematics in Afrikaans. That's where I come from, and I couldn't master the language I was asked to study through. So I would like to thank all of you for what you have done. I wish that the president was here to listen to all the voices we listened to. As I was sitting there, Shan, I thought, well, firstly, we must thank the president for at least acknowledging that he has received the memorandum. I'm sure many other presidents wouldn't even look at it, wouldn't even acknowledge it. So we need to thank him for that. But I wish he was here to listen to the voices that we have listened to. And I thought, sitting there, Shan, that maybe next year we must plan not the night before, because he won't come. If you invite him the night before, he won't be able to come. We must plan maybe some few days before and say, President, can you come and listen to the people before you go and do a State of the Nation? And I think it would be a powerful way of communicating what we would want to communicate. I just want to say, you've said all the things I wanted to say. I wanted to say to you, we started the DOD because of the crisis we're facing. It was like things were falling apart, like Chinua Achebe would say in the title of his book. Things were falling apart. We had a former president who was ignoring the courts and walking away from a commission, just lawlessness and people threatening that if you arrest him, the whole country is going to be on fire. Indeed, we experienced a little bit of the fire that we experienced at that time. We took a stand as the DOD to say, we are not going to allow a situation where the constitution of the country is ignored and that there would be lawlessness and we end up being governed by criminals, because that's really the issue we were dealing with at that time. But I want to say something that has hit me in the last few days. Fortunately, some of us have got the benefit of looking at things from all the windows, this windows thing. You look at one window, you find one story, and another window, you find another story. I've been going through this, and then I read the 2021 report of the state of local government. Please just go and Google it and read it. You will know how serious the crisis we are facing is. The one mistake we made, it's not to watch what was happening in government. Go and read it, you'll see the number of municipalities that are dysfunctional. They are not able to deliver any services at all. And we're paying people to do it, but they are not able to do it. And it became clear to me as I read that report that we have got the wrong political leadership that has no capacity to make the decisions to make sure you don't end up where these municipalities are. We have got the wrong appointees who are supposed to run a local government with no capacity at all to do it. And we've got wrong personnel, and it has become clear in the last year or so that the corruption has gone beyond the political leaders and the managers to middle management. So it's now middle management. We made a mistake to actually think we were empowering blacks. I'm beginning to think like that, we actually thought we must have an empowerment system for black people. But actually what we have created, it's a competition between black people. And so now, young black people who want to do business, are just good entrepreneurs, must now pay somebody in government to do business as black people. Leave whites alone now in this matter. It's now black against black, and we're beginning to kill each other around those issues. And look at Fort Hare, the experience of Fort Hare. And so we have a crisis of a magnitude we never, ever thought of. And that even the people who will be meeting in this parliament tomorrow are themselves captives of that system. And that they are not able to move beyond what they are supposed to do. I mean, I can give you examples that are endless. The Minister of Finance came in one meeting and showed us the billions of money that gets returned to Treasury without spending it. So the key issue for me, it's no more money, it's capacity to actually serve the people. And if we use the money to serve with capacity, we can produce more. And then we've got a problem of corruption that is of such a magnitude, I can't believe it. Young black, they come to me, young black entrepreneurs who go and say, I've got this idea to serve my people and change their lives. And it will require 10 million to do that. And then they say to this person, we'll give you this tender if you add 30 million there, so that the 30 million comes to us. Then we'll give you this tender that is about 10 million. Listen to the court case in the Free State, 24-point-something million project, 19 million of it went elsewhere. And they've not been able to deliver the project. We have got a gigantic problem in our hands. And I just want to say, in summary, we need the people of South Africa to construct a people's manifesto. You heard Tessa talking about it because I spoke about it in their meetings elsewhere. We need to mobilize the people to say, what do they want? What type of country do they want? We need to create the manifesto, develop it, and then say to the politicians, this is the country we want. If you are not going to be party of this plan, you should not be in leadership. And we're going to determine who becomes a leader. But let me just conclude by saying that those politicians who will be meeting there tomorrow know that after these speeches we've made, we'll do nothing. They know that. And so they will ignore us. Unless we mobilize the masses of the people, and I'm going back to the United Democratic Front, where we come from. We decided at that point that we can't defeat this system. It's too big and it's sophisticated. I worked at the Nuclear Physics Research Unit at Wits during those years, and we resigned there because we began to feel, oops, if the top scientist we are working with is a second atomic scientist in the country, we might be producing nuclear weapons against ourselves. And I was working on a sophisticated machine, which was the most sophisticated in the Southern Hemisphere. And I was producing results, but I don't know what else happens with those results. And we decided in 1979 we're going to walk out of here and not be part of what might be creating something that will destroy us. And so we felt you need the masses. And I just want to challenge you today, go and look at those municipalities, and there you have people who live there. Why are we not mobilizing people ward by ward? Ward by ward. And then we interacted with business, trade unions, Communist Party, in the last few days. We've been engaging with people and political entities. I won't go into the details. And what we need is to declare a war, not in terms of arms, but a war that's going to say, in this municipality with poor people, where they are not having services, we're going to put up a team of engineers and water engineers, everybody, go into that place and deal with that problem. We need to begin to do something for the people. If we make noise and do nothing, it's not going to happen. And we can mobilize people around that. Let me make this example, which is in the text, and I'll stop, Sean. We visited a community in Tuani community in Limpopo. We had a road show. We found there government has built a dam. And I remember making those decisions during my time for that dam. And they spent billions of rands. They put pipes to the community, but there's no water. And then I discovered when I asked more questions, no, the farms in Berkersta, what is that, Berker, whatever, the mines, they get the water from that dam. The farmers get the water from the dam, but the people don't get the water. And I wanted to know why. They say no. They put a machine that can't pull that water to the community. But how did the business community and the farmers do it? No, they just went there and put their machine and pumped the water to go and do their mining. And I thought, well, why didn't we ask the business people to help pump the water to the community? And it could have been done. But what it means is that we discovered that billions have been stolen that should have put the necessary equipment to get the water to the community. We can go there and go and do something about it and call on government to account. I think we need to be able to not just make noise, but act to force government to do something. And we worked at the UDF level until we even had street committees to be able to deal with the system. And when I was under threat, the community had a street to take care of me in that street. We need to reach a stage where the system can't exist outside us. And these parliamentarians will not continue doing what they are doing if we are there on the ground to deal with the crisis. And I would like to call on you that there's no other easy way except mobilizing the people and develop a system that will send a fear of God on those who are in power, not to continue doing what they are doing. Shan, during the UDF, we reached a stage where the intelligence system couldn't cope up anymore because they couldn't cope up with everybody who was mobilized in the country. That's what we need to do. And I believe we'll liberate the political leadership, including the president, to be able to do what they are supposed to do. Thank you.
What a powerful end. We need to organize the people so that they can liberate the politicians, including the president. Absolutely powerful. Reverend Chikane, I'm going to have to ask you to please come back up. I've got instructions from Zakira. As I think one of the few people who were around at the time of the UDF, they just want to present you with this calendar that marks the 40th anniversary, but to also call on all of the speakers who are still here to come and do one collective photo shoot and to endorse the last statement that Reverend Chikani concluded on. When you come up here, you share the responsibility of organizing people to do what he has said they need to do to the political leadership of this country. Ladies and gentlemen, we want to thank you for your presence and apologize for extending the time. But I think you would agree, we've heard people here reflect on the big issues, the real issues that we hope will find its way into tomorrow's speech. I know we live in hope, but the key message here today was not to give up hope, but to also work to create hope through the deeds and actions that will follow from here. So this is just a commemorative calendar, Reverend Chikani, marking 40 years of a movement that you gave life to. Nick and all of the other speakers, if you would please come up as well. I can't guarantee that you'll all get calendars, but please come forward. And a huge round of applause to all of the speakers here. People, before you go, can you also just help us clear any litter that might be here so that we keep the church in a way that we found it? And there's fruits and water in the courtyard for those who need to have that. Please go home safely and help us take forward the message from today. Thank you very much.
Zakira, you must be included.
I think the calendars we can give
No, Nick, Son, come closer, come closer.
Rumours are rife that a cabinet reshuffle is imminent. Following the shake-up in the ANC's top ranks in December's national conference, as well as the recent resignation of Deputy President David Mabuza, there are some vacancies that need filling. And with the State of the Nation address coming up next Thursday, could we see that cabinet reshuffle sooner rather than later? Timing aside, Business Unity South Africa is more concerned with who will make the cut. Busa is calling for President Cyril Ramaphosa to elect an effective cabinet, saying that's vital to restoring confidence in the economy. Let's unpack this further with Busa's CEO, Kaz Kuvadia. Thank you very much, Mr. Kuvadia, for your time this evening. Which portfolios are most concerning for you at this stage?
Well, we've raised a number of portfolios. One is, and thank you for having me, one is mineral resources and energy. It's absolutely a critical issue, not only given the load shedding, but that we've got to deal with our energy infrastructure and our energy environment in the long term. Second is transport, given the state of affairs in our logistics in South Africa. Third is trade, industry, and competition, where we believe that business needs to be seen as a partner and not as some sort of an antagonist. And then Department of Public Enterprises is a critical one that we also see. Finance and police. So those are the ones we've earmarked in our letter to the President. But obviously those are just top of mind at the moment, and that's why we've earmarked them.
Right, so you want the President to split mineral resources and energy. Just before I ask you that question in full, just so our viewers know, we have that council sitting from eThekwini on the right side of your screen, that vote of no confidence in Mayor Mxolisi Kaunda happening as we speak. We'll take you there live if there is a development. But in the meantime, Mr. Kuvadia, why would you like the President to split the Department of Mineral Energy or Mineral Resources from the Energy Department?
Well, we think mineral resources is a critical element of the economy in the country, and I think that we have a lot of work to do in there. Licensing has been very slow. We've hardly conducted any exploration activities for many years. The policy environment is still not certain as I think investors would like to see it. And given the role of the mining sector in the South African economy and its contribution to the GDP, we believe that it needs specific focus and specific attention to ensure that we have an appropriate policy environment, to ensure that we unblock blockages in licensing and in exploration and so on. And then energy, obviously, as I said earlier, an extremely critical area. So we believe that for one ministry to deal with both of those critical issues in the country, and they're critical because of the situation we find ourselves in, because of mismanagement and misgovernance in the past. That's the situation we find ourselves in. So that's why we've recommended that the ministries be split so that these two critical areas for our economy are given the attention and focus they deserve.
Just for our viewers, breaking news at this point in time, Mayor Mxolisi Kaunda has survived that vote of no confidence. We'll bring you an update from eThekwini a little bit later. We continue for the moment with BUSA CEO Kaz Kuvadia. Let's talk about the transport departments. That's one of the portfolios you've singled out as being problematic, and we all know about the challenges within Transnet and the logistics network, the rail infrastructure not providing South African businesses with the support it needs to move goods. What would you like to see happen in the leadership of this portfolio? We're obviously going to see Fikile Mbalula. He's moved to Luthuli House, so that position is open. Any candidates that you've earmarked?
No, we're not earmarking any candidates. We're not recommending to the President who he should appoint. What we are suggesting to the President is the qualities that are necessary for ministers, and it's not our role to even suggest to the President who he should appoint. So we haven't earmarked any individuals for these positions. I think on the transport side, logistics are obviously critical. I think that we've lost our competitive advantage as far as ports are concerned, even on the African continent. And any new minister needs to be alive to the worsening operations and financial situation at Transnet, and need to fix that up. I think Transnet needs to be more receptive to working with the private sector. We've been talking to Transnet on an ongoing basis, and we believe the private sector can play a critical role in working with Transnet to handle some of the operational issues, to take over some of Transnet's role as far as movement of goods and services are concerned. And a minister needs to look at that. Also, I mean, our road infrastructure is a problem in at different times when we've had the unrest in KwaZulu-Natal, and at other times we've had highways being blockaded. Well, that's a law and order issue, but also the Minister of Transport needs to be alive to those things and how we manage and plan our road network so that we minimize those sorts of things. So transport is critical to economic growth, critical to business because of movements of goods and services. And if we are losing our competitive advantage there, it just makes business more expensive, and some of our logistics companies will simply move to other parts of the continent to transport the goods.
What's BUSA's position on SOEs moving out of the Department of Public Enterprises and into their line departments?
We've taken the view that there should be a separation between the role that the DPE plays as shareholder and the role that the operational side that departments play. We think that given the state of our SOEs at the moment and the amazing amount of work that needs to be done to actually build confidence in them, these should be kept separate at this point in time. But having said that, we'd like to see what the government is doing about the Presidential SOE Advisory Committee and the recommendation they made about some sort of sovereign holding company to manage SOEs. And so we need a fundamental rethink about SOEs, and we believe that any minister of provincial public enterprises needs to be alive to that, needs to work with the private sector very closely and ensure that there's firstly rationalization of SOEs. What we don't need, let's close. What we do need and what is important in the national interest, let's make sure that they govern properly and they actually operate properly.
We know about the impact of crime on businesses. In the last couple of years, we've seen an incredible surge in extortion of businesses in many parts of the country. And obviously, crime has a much wider impact than just that. But let's talk about the Ministry of Police. Do you think a leadership change is in order there?
Well, again, we're not going to tell the president which ministry or which minister he should change. It's not our place to tell him that. What we are recommending to the president, that the police services and under the leadership, strategic leadership of a minister, need to get on top of organized crime, because a lot of this is organized crime. The so-called business forums that actually stop construction and make all sorts of threats are organized people. They started in KwaZulu-Natal, it's now started in Gauteng. What's happening at Eskom is organized crime. And a minister needs to be alive to that and has to have the resources, the skills, and the expertise to deal with that in his team. We've got to rebuild our crime intelligence service. They fell short during the insurrection in KwaZulu-Natal and other parts of the country. We need to rebuild those, and we need to give the public and business the confidence that we're doing that. And then there needs to be greater cooperation between communities, business, and government in identifying where crime is happening, in putting together structures that can actually alert police and so on. But to do that, communities and business need to have faith in the police services and trust. And any minister in the police, the heading of the police, needs to actually build that. And this is probably, after energy, one of the most critical areas that we need to deal with, not only because of business confidence and confidence for investors, but ordinary people in our country are feeling the brunt of the lack of law and order, and essentially the breakdown of law and order in South Africa.
You spoke a little bit earlier about the qualities that you would like to see the president lifting out or emphasizing in the cabinet members that he picks. And we know that leadership is only one of those skills, but what do you think leadership, the impact of leadership is on that filter down process? Because one of the things that we are lacking to a huge extent is implementation. We make incredibly good plans, we have solid policies in place, but implementation is lacking in many of our portfolios.
Yeah.
Talk to me about how leaders influence that implementation in your view.
When we talk about leadership in cabinet ministers, we are saying that one, the minister needs to be absolutely clear that he or she will have an evidence-based approach to what decisions that are made. You don't make decisions on the hoof. You look at evidence, you do the work, you do the research, and you may take decisions on the basis of evidence. You surround yourself with good technical people. Because if you don't have the technical people, you can't implement. So you surround yourself with good technical people. You be flexible as evidence changes and as the environment changes. You must be flexible and you must be able to think on your feet and change your point of view if that is necessary in the national interest. Policy is absolutely critical, but we've seen in the last decade or so that policy becomes a liability. Even good policy becomes a liability if we don't implement. So leadership in the current crisis we have, any minister must actually demonstrate that policies are being converted into implementation, and doing that quickly, doing that responsibly, and doing that in a way that there's sound governance behind it. And then we expect ministers to have the leadership so that they recognize that they need to govern. Consultation is absolutely critical, but we can't get into consultation paralysis, and ministers cannot expect a consensus on every issue they consult different stakeholders on. You should have a time frame for consultation, you should listen to stakeholders, and then you should take a decision. So a decision taken, business might not be happy with the totality of that decision, but we have certainty and we can work with that. And we expect ministers to do that. We don't expect ministers to spin wheels in trying to get a consensus on every issue with all stakeholders. So it's those sorts of stuff that we expect to see in leaders, and that's the sort of leadership we expect. And then to ensure that the cabinet is aligned behind the president. We can't have mixed messages coming from government, from different ministers. And if that continues, then the president has got to crack the whip and hold ministers accountable.
So we've talked a little bit about the kind of qualities that you'd like to see, about the kind of leadership skills, but let's talk about qualifications. Do you think cabinet ministers need to have certain minimum qualifications? Because we know that the political influence often overrides whether the person is best suited to that specific portfolio.
Look, ideally, if you have a minister that has the qualifications to actually manage the portfolio he or she has been given, that's a plus. But I'm not too convinced that ministers need to have specific qualification and high sort of postgraduate degrees and so on. I think that's a plus, and that would be, I think, an asset in any minister. But what we need is a minister who understands the sort of leadership we're talking about, who understands his or her responsibilities to this nation, and understands that he or she is not in that position for their own benefit, and understands sound governance, understands the importance of if he or she does not have those technical capabilities or even the academic qualifications. He or she must be able to surround themselves with good people to actually ensure that while the minister gives strategic direction, while the minister might have political sauce and a political history, because a lot of our leaders have grown up and have developed their leadership in politics. And we've had very, very good leaders that have developed their leadership skills and honed their leadership skills in politics. But so I think those sorts of people, if they are appointed, must recognize where the gaps are given that they're not technically qualified and they may not have the necessary academic qualifications? Where are the gaps? And they must be receptive to advice from outside, not only in government, from business and elsewhere, and must utilize the best available capacity in the country to fill those gaps, surround yourself with good people, and never lose focus that you are there to deliver a better condition of life to all of the people in South Africa, and that's your job. And
before I let you go, I've got one last question for you. I want to find out from you. You want to see a leaner cabinet. Can you tell us where you think we can trim some fat?
Well, I think that there are some ministries that have 2 deputy ministers. We need to ask ourselves whether we need that. We need to ask ourselves whether every minister needs a deputy minister. Every ministry needs a deputy minister. I just think to have a cabinet that is so bloated, and despite the size of the cabinet has not actually met the expectations of delivery. We do need to, the president needs to take a step back and say, what's a fit-for-purpose cabinet to actually address the myriad of crises we have in this country? How do you hold your cabinet accountable? And those are the questions the president needs to ask and arrive at the appropriate decisions.
Well, thank you so much for your insights. That was Business Unity South Africa CEO Kaz Kuvadia.